Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon which part of the world you all have joined today, and a very, very warm welcome to you all. My name is Sujoy Chatterjee, and I manage the end user computing services for ITC Infotech. And we are here on a virtual fireside chat with Subbu, the CIO and head of end user experience for APSA Group. And let me just do a quick introduction for Subbu. And Subbu has about 13 years of IT experience, currently manages the end user computing and experience for APSA and various IT platform exposures, including tech bar, service desk, field services, and, a whole lot of those host of services which impact the end user experiences. And he has spent about 8 years as a head of partner management and end user computing and been responsible for various functions within the management of those services. Extensive knowledge of IT and has been working very closely with the end users. And on the personal side, he enjoys tennis, soccer, golf, and just loves those, the cars, the old school cars and the classics. So, welcome Sabu to the chat, and you know, thank you so much for joining me here.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, depending on which side of the world you are, and thank you for having me, Sujoy.
Great, thank you. And I think we've got a very interesting topic today, Subbu. And while we get into deeper into this discussion, I think the starting point has always been that this 1 year had been very tough for many. It has been very challenging for many. And on the work side, things have really changed. And I know we get onto all these chats and talk about the new normal and things around these new way of working. But then today we thought we'll have a slightly different way of looking at how we really see this after this pandemic things are working out. And to start the discussion, I think it's important to bring up some of these very different elements on our discussion. And I think some of the things which we have figured out that we all have expected in some way or the other this new working style. And some of us have been forced to use these new ways of working, and some of us have actually accepted it. So it will be very interesting to understand how this entire flow would be, and that's how we will actually conduct our discussion today. And to start it, I think I wanted to mention some very interesting facts. And there was a survey done with about 317 CFOs worldwide, and it was very interesting the data which came out. One of the data points was that about 10% of the workforce will permanently work from home, and that's a large number for some organizations. And the other part was that they said that about 48% of the people would work from remote partially, and that again means that office spaces would change, the way people are hiring, leasing places would change, and there's a whole lot of dynamics which is going to change across this spectrum. So how is it in your region? And I think, Sabu, while there are a lot of statistics coming in, it'll be interesting to know from your perspective how the industry is looking at in your region, and otherwise what you've been reading.
Yeah, unfortunately, COVID did not come with a manual. So I think it depends. I think it's worth saying that none of this is fact. It's a point of view. And from my point of view, the current status is going to be the new ways of working. So the current norm is going to be the norm going forward. And yes, there's industries where on level one now people are going back to the office and so on. But for me, a fair percentage is about 60% of the workforce, I believe, should continue to work from home.
Okay.
And the rest, where needs be, can go into the office as and when they need to. But I do think that this is a new way of working for people to work from home. I also just feel, in as much as there'll be the odd exception of people taking advantage of this, where discipline is an issue, I do think majority of the people, they enjoy working from home, and as a result, they do apply themselves. And for me, if discipline comes into the picture, I really do think if we as managers, and I really do think this is a shift within the managers' point of view and frame of perspective, is that we really need to realize that heads on desks doesn't always equal productivity. I think the past year has shown us that people are capable of working from home. And if you trust people to do it, I think people will repay that trust by working even more hours from home. And I think another perspective that we need to think about is from a people side, people also need to get into a discipline of having work hours where they are able to switch off and spend time with the family as well. Because the other dynamic is now working from home, people are spending 12 to 16 hours in front of the laptop, which is also not healthy. So I think it's
It's
both
make,
from the manager's perspective and from the end user perspective, lots of learning, lots of unlearning that needs to happen for us to accept this as the new norm going forward.
No, absolutely, I agree. It's been a very different world for the last 1 year, and we all hope that things start settling down. But then at the same time, I believe there were a lot of technological challenges which people had faced during this time when the pandemic actually hit. Whether it was to do with we had heard stories around people buying laptops in bulk. Sudden internet ramp ups are happening, data protection issues, application virtual, all type of these quick ramp up issues. So how were your technology challenges within the APSA group, and how really did you take those challenges head on? So, I think I'm sure you had also gone through this, and the entire industry has been impacted. So, how was it for you? Because for you, end users are the way the entire environment works.
Yeah, so I'm going to mention about three technological challenges that we had to go through, and then I'll mention two or three other aspects from a human point of view. So I think security. I mean, I work in the financial sector, so data privacy, data security, very important aspect of how we run our shop within the financial sector. So I think how people access the data from home, using your personal device to come into the bank. How do we make sure you do that securely? I mean, when you're in the office, it was relatively easy. You're inside going out, so we know exactly how you enter the organization and what you're doing. But now we had to look at the perspective from a security point of view. If you're outside coming in, how do we accommodate that? How do we make sure that you access the data safely in a way that we can audit and still make sure that we track everything you do? So security was for me the top priority, and I know internally within our organization, our CSO team, which is led by Sandro, did a lot of work, and initially it caused a lot of noise because people just expected it to be seamless. What I could do in the office, I need to be able to do from home. But obviously, how you interact now with the data from home, we needed to put more stringent policies in place to make sure that we still protect the bank.
Sure.
The second one I'd say is network connectivity. Everybody was inside connecting out, but now when you're out connecting in, how you connect in, the strength of your own ISP solution also determines how your user experience is when you connect to the data inside the bank. So I think the second one was definitely network bandwidth. We
Hmm.
did have some challenges, and we had to really look at how we get people to connect safely and in an acceptable way from a bandwidth point of view.
Sure.
And then the last one, I would say the actual tools that we use to connect. We now all of a sudden had to go from a mind shift of having a desktop techie who was always available that you can call on to say, I've got this issue on my machine, quickly come sort it out. All of a sudden, there was a shift in reliance to a more back office and a service desk compliance where you now need to call the service desk. They now need to remote into your machine and they need to support you from there. So initially, there was a lot of challenges. Some of the software tools didn't work on all the machines. Some of the tools worked and some didn't. And we actually saw that from an application point of view as well, remoting in caused some challenges as well. So yeah, those are the three things from a technology point of view. It was security, it was network, and it was the tools that we use. But then from the human side as well, I think there was a lot of change where, as I said, there was you always had this specific engineer on call, and we had field service engineers all over the floors in branches running around, making sure that we can help you. We're at your beck and call. Now all of a sudden you had to call somebody who was going to either help you online or call somebody else. And I think that dynamic where the previous field service engineer knew your machine because they've been working on it for 2 or 3 years, to somebody new who has to start from scratch and try and figure out what is wrong with your machine. I think initially it caused a lot of frustration because you expect that you're in IT, you should know what's wrong with my machine. But now you're talking to a different audience that's in the front line, and all of a sudden you see that you have to invest more now in the kind of skill set that you have in a service desk or a back office environment, because all of a sudden your field service engineer is now on third call and no longer on first call because people are not in the office. So
Sure.
those kind of shifts for me were I would say the biggest technological shifts from a COVID perspective.
I can absolutely appreciate that, Sabu. And I've been talking to, CIOs globally, and I see this impact everywhere because, one of the things which we feel is there was a certain convenience where, you could probably not even log a call or log a ticket and just get somebody and say, hey, can you fix this for me? Which is completely gone. And I think for us in the last 1 year, what we have seen as a big impact had been that a whole lot of new innovations which had happened, a lot of new solutions which we have built here at ITC Infotech, wherein what has happened is that some of the challenges you were talking about, you make that first call, you need to now tell them who you are and what is happening, wherein we have gone ahead and make sure that the users are identified while they are actually logging in. We are making sure that there's a whole lot of shift on self-service which is happening. And these self-services are not like, I go and log a ticket, but it's like I go and get my work done. And that has made a big impact in terms of the way things have shifted. Wherein initially people thought, because now everybody will be remote, my service desk, which had 50 people, will become 150 people. But actually, with most of these technology and tools, the tools you mentioned, actually didn't do that. We were so quick to adopt this new way of working, having these technology layers coming in, that we remained at 50. And rather, we started looking at those visits which were happening reduced. Users started getting used to a different way of working, and a lot has changed around this. But then one thing which becomes very, very interesting as a topic to discuss, and that's also one of the themes which we have today, is how has that gone and impacted productivity? Because there was always this big concern, and that's the reason initially, or for years, people had been very concerned on working remotely. What will happen to productivity? Will people work? How will this work? Do really people work? So what's your take on that? Because we've been a year into it, and I'm sure there's a lot which we have seen, heard. So how did APSA go about doing it, and what's your take on that?
So Sujo, yeah, I think it depends on the maturity level of each organization. I think if I look at adoption, you'd find that many organizations were actually ready for a work from home kind of setup. It just needed to be enforced on them before they actually started using it. And I mean, I can tell you that we had a utilization of about 12% from a team's perspective. 2 years after adopting the technology. And then 3 weeks into COVID, we were well above 70% on utilization on Teams. And that speak to the fact that we couldn't do it. It was just one of those things. People never had to do it, and they never did. The other interesting thing is you would think IT people would find it relatively easy to work from home. We had so many challenges with IT people who always had the luxury to work from home, but they just never did. And when they had to, it all of a sudden became this new thing to them. And some people didn't know how to connect via the 3G. Do you connect via Wi-Fi and 3G? And it was an interesting dynamic, and that's where we realized that we also now needed to invest in soft skills, because now we literally need to train people on how to work from home from an IT perspective, and then also have that patience with people to understand that this is a new thing and they're not used to working that way, and there'll be frustrations. So for me, from a productivity level, personally, from an APSA point of view, the productivity didn't decrease at all. What
Mhm.
we found is that people were still very productive working from home. And I can tell you that from a senior management point of view, the view is even after COVID, we are going to look to continue to work from home for majority of our staff. And only if and when necessary to go to the office will you go to the office. But I think from a productivity point of view, I think people, when you trust people, they repay that trust. And I think it was important for people to realize that in as much as they can go back to the office now with level one, we really do feel that the pandemic is, I mean, we're looking forward to a third wave now that's coming. So we're nowhere near out the woods. And if people are working effectively from home, there's no reason why they shouldn't. And as I said in the beginning, I think from a management point of view, that mind shift change to say that heads on desks doesn't equal productivity. I think the more we trust people, the more we're seeing that people are repaying that trust by putting even more hours when working from home.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we are also going through the same, and what you are saying actually echoes by most of the CXOs across the globe, and they say while initially everybody was so apprehensive about work from home, it actually has worked out to be more productive. So people are willingly putting more hours into the work because I think they are saving some time. While they used to go to office, the travel times have been cut down, and that all is coming back into the whole ecosystem as more productive hours. And I remember talking to I know you earlier that you also said that there's a different angle to it which has come, which is more on the social side, wherein people are able to now say, I can go and drop my kids, which I was not able to do earlier. So things have changed, um, and if the productivity is going higher during this time, I think that's a good sign. But then there is one more part which actually always connects with the productivity, and we believe very strongly that when we talk about end users, it all is about the end user experience. You are heading the end user experience side of things at APSA, and I'm sure that balance, the right balance of the productivity increase and the experience going haywire, how do you really look at it, how do you really balance it, and what do you see as in the foreseeable future as to how that experience will get into this mix, and on this entire ecosystem, how do you see that experience measurement becomes a very key point, and when it goes to end user working and being productive?
Yeah, so it's a, how I phrase it is that, IT is seen as this cold environment, ones and zeros and servers and machines and desktops and, all of that. But I think the COVID has brought out the human side of IT. And I mean, I know I speak to some of my team members where we now have to set up weekly calls just to touch base with each other, and we have a monthly man-co session and all of those. And, it's interesting. What I started doing with my teams is I started setting up daily games, and this was driven from a discussion that I had with a former colleague who's now left the bank. But we decided to embark on this journey where we engage our teams in daily activities just to keep the interaction going, because the work from home went from 3 weeks to 2 months to 3 months, and a year down the line we're still
Yeah.
working from. And what I found interesting is, there's so much that I learned about my own team, and there's so much that the team learned about each other that we didn't know, that was sparked by all of these routines that we tried to get in place just to keep the team, motivated and so on. And interestingly enough, the human aspect of it is, like you said, where that extra hour in the morning that you spent in traffic now means when you wake up, you can make breakfast for the kids and take them to school. Now, when your kid goes to school and after school, they look forward to mommy or daddy picking them up from school, and you see the joy in your child's face when you pick them up from school. I mean, those are things we were not used to. If you stay in Joburg, you have to leave the house at 6 just to be at work on time, and vice versa. After hours, you get home, the kids are already at home. So even that small little, aspect of life that socially you can actually interact with your kids on a daily basis, it really makes a big difference. And with my teams, what we discovered is when we started the activities, most of the activities had a lot of active sport to do, run 10,000, make 10,000 steps a day, or jump around, or do activity A, B, C, and D. And what I found is for the first month that we did that, the participation from the team was actually about 15%. And then I realized, okay, let me take away all the activities and let's just now talk about what people find interesting. What's your favorite hobby? What do you like doing in your spare time? All of that. And all of a sudden, participation went up to 90%, in some instances, 100%. So what I discovered about my team during COVID is that my team is very lazy. They don't like walking, they don't like running, but they have a lot of hobbies and they like chatting about cars and social things and gardening. And we found out a lot of interesting things about each other that we've never guessed actually. So it's been from a end user experience point of view. I think the human side of IT will surprise you. There's a lot of people that you think you see in the office and they look very serious. You'll find out in their spare time they do a lot of fun activities that you would have never thought of. And it did bring us a lot closer as human beings and not just IT colleagues. So I think from an end user experience point of view, we really got to learn about the end user. And I think that's where IT went from a cold piece of equipment to really learning about end users. And you'll also be surprised that from an experience point of view, you have people walking around with MacBooks and fancy devices, but when you actually speak to them, the experience around interacting with their applications in the bank and so on, that wasn't fun. So you start to ask yourself, what is end user experience really? And end user experience is a multitude of things where if that ecosystem doesn't work, it doesn't matter that you're providing fancy devices, the end user experience is still negative. So the balance between making sure that people are able to connect safely, connect quickly, still use adequate devices, I think we still haven't mastered it yet, but we've gone a long way in understanding what is actually a user experience and how do we make it a positive user experience.
Oh, absolutely. I think very, very interesting facts, Subbu, there. And I think, some of the very interesting facts we saw, I know we've been working with multiple customers across the globe, and we've been helping them to see how this entire experience had been for them. And we typically call it a digital experience for their end user community. And we do use certain platforms to monitor, to manage, and some very surprising stats which came in. There were some customers, some users at a customer place who would say, around lunchtime, I'm not able to attend. They never said lunchtime, but they said, around this time of the day, my team's meeting really don't work very well. And it was surprising, how is it possible? No, there's no infrastructure problem, there's nothing. And then we figured out while we were actually analyzing the end user device to that level, that this user during lunchtime, or that was the lunchtime during those hours, would shift the position from where he would actually work to another place, and start working from there, where the signals on the Wi-Fi would drop. And because of that, the problem was there. And however, using technology and tools which we otherwise wouldn't have done, we were able to actually go back and tell the user that, your signals are dropping. So what is going on? And the user came back and said, I shift my location. I say, yeah, there you go. So now, well, that's how it started coming up. So many new stories. I'm not sure if you have any of those, where users had internet issues, which was surprising to the service desk.
Yeah, we I'll tell you a funny story. We had one specific user, and I think this guy was actually trying to be funny, and he said to her when he logged the call, he said, "But every time my wife leaves the house, I stop working. I can't work anymore. I don't understand what's wrong." So I thought to myself, okay, what's wrong with this guy? And I started chatting to him, only to discover that he was actually using his wife's phone as a Wi-Fi hotspot. Every time she left the room, he would stop working. But the challenges in the office environment, you would never face something like that. And no amount of training can get you ready for something like that. So these are some of the things, the challenges that we're faced with now, where somebody will just phone and say, nothing works. I can't work anymore. And you ask yourself, but you were working 10 minutes ago. How does this happen? And everybody else in your team is working. And then the minute they said, no, as soon as my wife leaves, I can't work anymore. I said, okay, so how are you connecting onto your machine? Are you using Wi-Fi? Yes, I'm using Wi-Fi. Can I just quickly see which Wi-Fi device you're using? Only to find he was hotspotting his wife's phone. And because the wife left, he stopped working. But yeah, I share some of those challenges. I think remote support has become increasingly difficult. And I can tell you that from a service desk perspective, we've certainly seen a hit when it comes to our call abandonment rate, because all of a sudden now an engineer who would usually spend about 4 to 5 minutes with a user, we'll spend 10 to 15 minutes with a user trying to figure out how are you connecting? Is your connection fine? Do you have data on your connection? All of those things before you actually troubleshoot the issue that the user's got.
Absolutely, I agree, and I think that's where we had this discussion earlier sometime that all the automation which we are doing at the end user side, all the new ways of working which we are putting into play is helping actually the end users to do a lot of self help in solving problems and not really making sure that I log a ticket with the service desk, and that is changing in a big way. So that's great to know about experience, but then I don't know if you've been hearing on social media this big talk which happened that a lot which CXOs couldn't do, the COVID did overnight, right? It was all about adoption of new technology and how do you really have this. And you talked about it that your collaboration platform which you have was only adopted about 12 to 15%, and then once this hit it suddenly went to 80%. So these were adoption which people did. But then there is a very thin line there which actually says there is a adoption which is voluntary adoption, and there is another thing which we always call, or I would say, forced adoption. And when I say forced adoption, that user doesn't have any choice, and hence they actually adopted that particular piece of technology. Now the problem with any of these forced adoption is when life starts coming back to normal, the tendency is to go back to the way you were working earlier, right? And that's where the forced adoption is always a very very big question. So I just wanted to know your view as to, first of all, do you believe that there is a piece of adoption which is forced adoption? And then the second part, do you believe that it will continue to be like this, or the way people look at adoption itself will change? So what's your view on that?
So I'll give a couple of examples. To answer your question, I definitely think there is such a thing as forced adoption. And I mean, I did mention in terms of utilization of Teams in our environment. I think that was forced adoption. It was the only way you can attend a meeting is on Teams. If you don't have Teams or you don't use Teams, then you can't enter the meeting. So that is a form of forced adoption. But I do think, there are so many self-help tools. I mean, we busy on a big automation drive, but some of these tools have existed and people just never use them. And I think how people view self-help, I think that's the issue. So for me, I mean, I've encountered people who came with a reasoning that says, I pay for a service desk. There's an allocation for service desk. So if I want to call the service desk, then I should be able to call the service desk and you should resolve my issue. But that's not really the point. The point is if there's a self-help tool that you can use to reset your own password, for an example. If you're struggling with Gmail, you don't call Microsoft and say, I can't access my Gmail. There's a text box for help. You type in your message and there's a chat bot in the background who will help you, but you'll never speak to somebody to fix your mail. Multi-choice. If there's something wrong with your decoder, there's options that you need to use on your phone. You will only speak to an agent as the last resort, but you will always have to try and fix the solution yourself. So the point is, in other aspects of our lives, we are using automation, we are using self-help. And I think people must just need to accept that it doesn't have to be forced upon you for you to utilize it. Some of these tools are really to your benefit, where if you did the self-help, it would take 30 seconds to sort out your issues, whereas you might spend 10 to 15 minutes waiting for a call center agent to answer your phone call. So I think some of those things, I think slowly but surely people are realizing they have to become a norm. You have to first see if you can solve the problem yourself before actually calling somebody to solve the problem for you. I don't think it'll ever be 100% adoption. But I do feel that if 80 to 90% of the organization then adopt those, then I think that's a good hit rate, and it allows you and your resources now to actually start growing and focus and give your people time to work on stuff that they should actually be working on, and not any of the petty stuff that you spend hours on that you shouldn't be spending time on. So I do think automation and self-help should be a big driver. Under COVID, we really also need to come to the party as end users and realize that in other aspects of our lives, we are using these tools. and it is to our benefit to use them.
No, I absolutely agree. I think what we have seen, and I think this is not during COVID, but the last decade, if you look at the last 10 years, if you see that most of us, and it includes everybody, all age groups, when they're using their personal devices, whether they're using their phones or tablets or using, like you said, Gmails or Hotmails of the world, they never ever called the service desk. They never logged a ticket, and they always got the work done. And I think today I see that even small kids would just go and install the software for you. Oh, I'll tell you how to do this. And not really asking to say, call a service desk. And I'm not talking about this gen or no, the new generation, but even if you step back and see, the earlier generation who got so used to this new way of using this technology. But for some reason, when they step into the boundary of that office, everything changes. They don't want that doing themselves and approaching it. But then what we surely believe that this last 12 months have made them realize that there is a way of working in the office also, and you can use this new ways of working. But I think the biggest challenge, and that's my viewpoint, is that most of the enterprises have these so-called self-service, which actually doesn't do beyond logging a ticket, right? They don't really solve the problem. And that's the reason most of the users tend to go back to pick up a phone and call them, because the way they have to approach self-service had been cumbersome. And after going through that entire process, the only thing they actually achieve is log a ticket. And that becomes a very difficult part on the discussion to convince them or make them adopt. So from a from a technology perspective, I think adoption of technology can only become better if we have a very clear measurement as to how the experience of the user is linked into the adoption of a new way of working, the technology part of it, how effective it is, and new ways of really adopting to say how their experience had been. See, a traditional way of going to a user and saying, I want to know how you experience this particular thing, is send a email to somebody as a long survey form or have a CSAT score to be picked up. And I look at it and say, okay, I'll do it later. And that later keeps going down on my mailbox and then ends up in a crash. Right. But if we have new ways of doing, and which I think we had been doing pretty effectively, where we are now saying that I don't need to send you an email. You have something which has been serviced. I have a pop-up which comes out of your operating system and say, I just serviced this for you. You can just say you liked it or you didn't like it. You don't have to have a 20-page question to have all the questions you ask. I liked it or I didn't like it. And I think people don't really mind. And even on social media platforms, we see you really like something, you don't mind giving a thumbs up. But then if you have to write a note below that, people really shy away from that. So I think the entire mix around adoption drive also go back and relate to experience. So if my experience is good, I will adopt. If my feedback mechanism is really being considered and new ways of working have been launched, I think it's an advantage, and that's how people start adopting. And I always believe that adoption of new technologies is not about one single time effort. It's an ongoing effort, and you have to do it always. It's like, if every morning you come in and say, this is going on. I can see what is happening on my end user space. Oh, so these are the things which are not being used very much. Let me see how to make sense of it, why people are not using it, how can I help them to use it better, and run certain campaigns around it. So that's how we look at the overall adoption around, the technology stacks. But then, maybe you want to add to that, Subbu, before I think I move on to, looking at the time, I think we'll move into the wrap up in a few minutes. So you want to, make your
Yeah, look, there's not much to add. I agree with you, Sujoy. I definitely agree with you how we interact with the users and how, the tools we have for self-help are designed. I think most of us fall into the developer way of thinking where you develop a tool for yourself and you think it works well, but how the end user receives it is not quite the same. And you should always develop with the end user in mind. So yes, there's lots of learning that needs to happen, but also with this adoption is also then transferring of skills and making sure that you don't also have a front line that just does catch and dispatch, because that also frustrates. its users. You know, you don't want to call someone who's going to call someone. Why can't I just call that person directly?
Right.
Also now need to start, you know, there's a training that comes in now and a mind shift that says, you know, your service desk agent and your back office agent now needs to have enough skill to be able to perform a first call resolution of about 90% plus for you to have value in your service desk or your frontline channel, so that the end user also feels the confidence to say, you know what, when I call this guy, I am going to get help. Otherwise, then what you end up using is you go back to the cycle where people will always have a friend on speed dial, and that's not really good for a support model. You do need to have that confidence where users know, if I call this person, then my issue will get resolved. So yes, let's have self-help. Let's have all these adoption, these new tools, these fancy tools to use. But for whatever reason, if there is an issue, you know, let's invest the training in our front end staff and make sure that we are able to add value to the customer who's calling first time around without actually getting them to speak to 10 other people before they
Sure,
get.
sure.
Um,
And actually, that's an interesting point. It brings me to my last question on this in this session today, and this something I've been, while listening to you, has been coming to my mind, that this entire concept which used to be there on the service desk, where you'll say I have a L0, L1, L2, and so on and so forth. I personally believe those boundaries are completely getting merged. They're diminishing, actually. I believe that the concepts of L0, L1, L2 are changing. And do you also believe that there'll be a new way of looking at service desk as a whole? And there'll be no more coming times, we'll not be calling them L0, L1, L2, but no, maybe we'll be calling them something different. I really don't know what name to give, but I'm sure there'll be a different name to that. What is your view
Yeah,
on that?
look, I think we'll move from having service desk agents versus field service agents to having field service agents and remote agents. All of them will be agents at the same level, just some will be remote and some will be field. That's my view.
Interesting perspective. So I think with that, I would actually, pause here and, first of all, I would actually thank you so much, Sabu, for not sharing your thoughts, and very interesting chat. And thank you, really appreciate that. But I would also like to open it to, our audience and, people who are on this session today. If they have any questions, it'll be interesting to hear it from them. And based on those questions, we can probably take some and answer, or otherwise we'll move to the wrap up section of our call today. So any questions from the viewers, they can actually go to the chat and chat box and chat those, type in those questions, which we can, between Sabu and myself, we will take it up and try to answer those questions for you.
I think you were very clear, Sujo. There's no questions.
I think thanks to you. So if there are no questions, I think I would go ahead and, first of all, thank you so much, Sabu, for your time and, such an interesting session. And I would like to thank all who attended this session today. And I would actually request them to, write any comments which they would have, or also write if they would like us to have a similar sessions in the in the future, and if they would like to participate with us on this session. And that would be my closing comment, but I would like Sabu to have his comment before we finally wrap up this session today.
Yeah, thanks, Sujoy, and thanks to everybody who's tuned in. I do want to say in closing that we've spent this session focusing on the positive sides from a business perspective of COVID and how we've navigated through it, all the technological changes and all the things that happened to get us to where we are. But I do want to, in closing, mention that there are the negative aspects to COVID. And the stats show now that we're no longer just talking numbers, but everybody knows a person that has now lost their lives due to COVID. So it's gone from a numbers thing to actually people's names that we all know. So I do want to say, I mean, we, from an ABSA Group perspective, just lost one of our CEOs, Peter McClary. So we know it all too well. Just condolences to Peter and his family, condolences to the ABSA Group as a whole, and further condolences to to everybody who's listening and everybody who's lost a loved one due to COVID in a very difficult period. And there's a lot of people that have also lost their jobs during this. So, whilst in IT many jobs were created, it's also worth acknowledging that many people have lost their livelihoods. I mean, I look at just from a building management point of view, we had certain people bringing in fruits and bringing coffee and cleaning the buildings and all of those things. And now, because we're no longer in those buildings, those people now cannot earn a livelihood. So I do want to just make a special mention that it's worth acknowledging that COVID has brought a lot of heartache to many people. And I just want to acknowledge those people and say that we really do keep them in our thoughts, and condolences to everybody who's lost somebody during this pandemic. Those who can continue to work from home, please do so. There's a third wave coming. So please stay safe and look after yourself and follow all the COVID protocols. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabu. Stay safe, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks.